want to start this module by paraphrasing the American psychiatrist Dr. Edwin Schneidman. He was the pioneer of the field of suicidology and the first clinician to open a suicide prevention clinic in the US and maybe in the world. And he's always been an inspiration for all of us who work in this area. Dr. Schneidman said, "The nature of suicide is psychological. So the best route to understand it is not by looking at the brain, at social statistics, or even mental illness. We should instead focus on human emotions." And this is going to be my focus today. I hope that by the end of this module, you'll be able to understand what leads a person to contemplate, attempt, and complete suicide. Thank you for being here, and let's begin. You may be asking, why should we shift our attention to the human mind? Well, this has several implications, but the main one is that it helps us understand the suicidal path from the perspective of the person's internal world. Because even though we are all impacted by culture and external circumstances, it is the psychological state that drives a person to suicide. Dr. Schneidman called this internal anguish psychache. So let me explain to you what that means. Psychache means pain, hurt, anguish that takes hold in the mind, even if it's created by events outside the self. Psychache creates a mental turmoil that stems from things like shame, guilt, fear, sense of abandonment, anxiety, loneliness. So, when this psychological pain becomes unbearable, it produces a desire to escape the pain. That's when suicide enters the picture. It becomes an option and sometimes the only one. Actually, the word only is central in understanding suicide because when the individual starts to believe that there is only one way out, suicide shows up in broad, bold colors. This type of black and white thinking is a hallmark of suicidal intent. Dr. Schneidman says, the single most dangerous word in all of suicidology is only. He referred to this as a constricted state of mind. I mentioned this on the warning signs module, but it's worth repeating. What we mean by that is that it is very hard for the person to see alternatives to suicide. In the previous module, I used the image of a tunnel to illustrate the mental constriction. Another useful one is that of blinders. They are placed on horses to limit their view, to erase any distraction they might have. This is what it feels like for the suicidal person. No matter how hard they try, sometimes they reach a point when seeing another option is impossible. The suicidal mind believes that death is a solution. Here, I want to emphasize something that I mentioned before but needs to be highlighted. The suicidal person doesn't necessarily want to end life. They want to cease unbearable pain. So you might be asking, where does this psychological pain come from? There is no easy, clear-cut answer that applies to everyone, but I'll provide you some. Again, I refer to Dr. Schneidman when he says, the primary source of severe psychache are frustrated or unmet psychological needs. And although these needs will change depending on the person, he mentions a few that are quite universal. The need to achieve, for example, is a common one in Western society. For this type of person, work, financial wealth, professional recognition may be a major priority, for example. Feeling accomplished adds value to their lives. But there are others. The need to affiliate or belong, safety, the need to love and be loved, to protect, to conquer, to have fun, seek pleasure, to socialize, to be independent. In a way, our psychological needs are a window into our personalities. It also points to the triggers of suicide, and these triggers will depend on the intensity of the frustration of not having these needs met. Let me illustrate this with two stories. The first one is about Steve, a British guest that I had on my podcast, Understand Suicide, episode 15. Stephen shared with us about the day he wrote a suicide letter to his daughter and left with the intention to take his life. Knowing that he's paraplegic, I thought that this was the reason behind his decision then. Maybe it had happened right after the accident, but no. What led his actions that day was his separation from his partner and the fact that she was already seeing someone else.
For a few months, me and Emma were growing apart. I
Mhm,
felt more alone at home.
mhm,
Although we'd be lying next to each other in the bed, there was no longer that connection. There was no longer that
mhm.
togetherness. You can feel that. You just know that. Even when the
Yeah,
cuddles are there, you
yeah,
just know
yeah.
that's not there. And at that point, I kind of I kind of felt really hopeless. I felt like I'd really failed. Here I was
Mhm, mhm,
for many years. I From a masculine point of view, I secured a girlfriend. I was here
mhm,
paralyzed. My hands are paralyzed. My nearly whole body's paralyzed.
mhm,
I can move my arms somewhat. I'm in an electric wheelchair. And all of
mhm,
those things on the masculine side are
mhm,
not great ideals. You don't,
mhm,
as a child, grow up to be. That's not what you would see as a man and a masculine man. And I just felt like I failed in every way of being a man. Here I was single. I
mhm,
was coming up 40. I was never going to get anybody ever again. This
mhm,
was, for years, I felt like I was okay. You know,
mhm,
I wasn't as much of a failure as I thought I could have been.
mhm,
And then for someone to go off with an able bodied person, to me, just it destroyed the masculine side of me. And
mhm.
it just, where was I? Who was I? You know?
For Stephen, his psychological needs were to connect, to love and be loved, and to fulfill his ideal of manhood. All of that cracked when his girlfriend left. But as I said before, psychological needs will vary from person to person. For Mariangela, you can listen to her interview on episode 16 of my podcast. The pain that led her to a suicide attempt was driven by shame.
I was raised in a way that didn't give me a lot of freedom and exposure. And so in high school, I was very sheltered. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very sad a lot of the time. And
Mhm,
I was caught off guard by some boys one day and I was sexually assaulted. And because of that, I had so much shame because my family didn't react well to things like that. So I had so much shame. I didn't want to tell them. I was afraid they would think I was a horrible slut and a horrible person. I was asking for it. So I thought my only way out was just to not be here anymore. And so I went home and my mother is very ill with several different illnesses. And I took all of the medication that she had and I proceeded to vomit on my bedroom floor. My sister found me half
mhm,
conscious, called an ambulance. My brother was there,
mhm,
and then went to the hospital. My stomach was pumped, given Epicac. The doctors asked me what happened. I told them. My mother had some not very nice things to say. And I just remember not ever talking about it again.
So I hope that these examples have helped you understand psychic and the concept of psychological needs. Now I want to go back to the idea of mental constriction. so that I can explain another important concept to you. The idea that suicide happens within a continuum. Although there are cases when suicide takes place by impulse, that's not the majority. Usually, the person progresses through stages, and these stages are: let's start with thoughts. It's important to note that suicidal feelings and thoughts can affect anyone of any age, gender, ethnicity, or background at any time. They may be caused by different triggers like grief, bullying, financial crisis, the end of a relationship, mental health issues, isolation, addiction, trauma, rejection, just to name a few.